bizarre situation where about a week before we started shooting, we had chosen several castles around Scotland, all owned by the National Trust, who at the very last moment said we couldn't use them because they were frightened that we wouldn't respect the dignity of the fabric of the building. Because they thought we'd make a few jokes. And these are buildings where people were tortured to death. The most awful crimes against humanity had been committed within these walls of these castles. And we were going to make fun of them, is what they were fearful of. And so we weren't allowed to go and use any of their castles, which meant we then had to completely reorganize our plans. And Terry and I were rushing around Scotland trying to find privately owned castles. And we found one, the one that's used at the end of the film out on that little island called Castle Stalker. And what that entailed was that our plans for the big army sequence at the end, where we're supposed to have hundreds and thousands of soldiers, knights rampaging around the place, we suddenly had to do 2 weeks early in a place that we hadn't planned. The costumes and all the props were still down in London. And we managed to get probably about 20 or 30 costumes up there. And the shot you see when they all come rushing down the hill, which was shot in a different place, but then we see a moment where they all come rushing under the camera and the police car comes in between them and the castle. In fact, what's there is about 2 lines of soldiers in costumes. That were all the costumes we had. And the rest are banners held up by the crew and their children and their wives, and they're in front of camera wiggling it around to make it feel like there's rows and rows of soldiers. There was literally about 20 people there in costume. And that was really interesting because when you're caught in that situation where you've got nothing to lose, you then do these outrageous gambles that shouldn't work, and they work more often than not. And what gets more difficult as you make films is you get more money, and you have to do things in the proper way because you don't have any excuse if it goes wrong. And when you don't have enough money, you've got the best excuse in the world, because if it doesn't work, you can say, well, I didn't have enough money, I didn't have enough time, it's the fault of that why it didn't work. But when you've got the money and the time, you've got no excuses, and the whole process becomes far, far more difficult, and there's a greater weight is put on your shoulders.
Bill has an amazing follow-up ideas and influences. Can you explain how it came about when you decided to make it?
Brazil was something that had just been brewing inside of me for a long time. I think it was basically a form of catharsis. It was really my own frustrations with having lived in New York, having been involved in a job, one or two. I was in an advertising agency, which was in terms of bureaucracy is very, very minor. But the whole idea of bureaucracies and people being unable to think for themselves, just doing what their job says they should do. These things had really begun to frustrate me more and more, and I wanted to get this out of my system. And so I just started building up. Originally, I was trying to do it in time for 1984, because 1984 was in my mind, and I wanted to call it 1984 and a half. And then, unfortunately, they made the film and it came out, and so I couldn't do that. And I'd worked on it. It probably took about 6 or 7 years for that thing to grow. And I'd originally written a script which had most of the elements in it, but it was like the pieces of a jigsaw, but they weren't quite in the right order. And then I got Tom Stoppard involved, who rearranged the pieces in a better way. And then from Tom, I took the script and then worked with Charles McEwen, because I felt Tom had shifted the emphasis in the wrong direction. And so it was a very long, organic process of working, trying to say something, trying to find a way of saying it. And then we started shooting. And originally the film was more evenly balanced between the fantasy and the reality. And 12 weeks into the shoot, it was clear I had a film that was going to be about 5 hours long, and it was going to cost 10 times the budget. And so we stopped the whole production, and I started tearing pages out. And most of the pages I tore out were the fantasy sequences. It was like another film in fantasy there. And then even after we finished shooting, we started shifting things around. It's very interesting. That's why I demand to be in these situations where I have total control of it, because if we had been working within the studio system or with a producer who was rigid in his approach, we wouldn't have been able to make the film. We were able to shift and stop and do intelligent things and play, and even after it was all shot, to rearrange the pieces, to see where it's leading. When you're making those things, after a while you don't know what you're doing. You try to remember where because it's like going into the woods. You're heading to there, and you start here, and you're heading there. And then within a few steps into the woods, the trees have taken over, and you get lost. And you try to remember where you started from and where you're trying to go. And it's a very strange process. And somehow at the end, we got where we wanted to go, but it's quite different. The route was not the route we set out to take. It was a very convoluted route. But I was in a position where I could control the interference in that rambling through the woods. That's the main thing. I couldn't necessarily control where we were going, but I could control the influences on us as we chose this path or that path. I enjoyed that one. I didn't enjoy it because we shot for 9 months on that film. And it was a rough one, but in the end, I'm very pleased with it. No, I mean, the most important thing was that we were able to make the film we wanted to make. And I actually do believe in the long term that somehow things find their audience. And I think that's what's happened with Brazil. It seems to become more popular with each year, and more people know about it, more people see it. And it's often nice to be able to do something that's totally outside or against the system that basically distributes and markets films, the system that we're all heavily influenced by, even when we don't think we are. It's insidious. It's always there, and it is a big machine there that does it. And with Brazil, it was totally outside that system, and it still found its audience. And what's nice is to see the effect it's had. I turn on the television and keep seeing commercials, the direct rip-offs of Brazil. It's had an effect somewhere. No, I mean, things sort of end up, you go through periods, and that's history now. That's done. Terry Jones probably doesn't agree with me. Terry's constantly talking about, if only we had done this or if we'd done that. And he keeps changing it. I sort of let things go at a certain point. It's like Fisher King. I mean, it's out now, and as far as I'm concerned, it could either be last week's history or it could be 20 years ago. It's all the same to me. It's gone. I've done everything I can do to help that film. Now it's on its own, and I don't even look at my films. To be honest, I talk as if I know about Brazil, but I haven't seen Brazil since I made it. So I'm told it's a good film, though.
I think we're running out of time, so I've got to end on that note.
Mine? It's a green today. Yeah, gone. Ecologically sound underwear. It's biodegradable underwear, actually.